A simple woman was mocked the second she stepped into the premium boarding lane, her pale shirt tucked neatly into faded slacks, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder like some relic from another life. The traveler ahead of her wrinkled his nose and shifted his designer suitcase away, as if poverty might be contagious. A teenage girl in heels whispered to her phone camera, zooming in on the scuffed shoes and muttering, "Security really dropped the ball today." A flight attendant passed with a tablet in hand and gave a tight smile, the kind people give when they're certain you're in the wrong place. When Dana didn't step aside, the gate agent asked twice if she was looking for the staff entrance. No one looked her in the eye for more than a second. Her silence only seemed to irritate them more, as if her lack of embarrassment was somehow a challenge. Then a name crackled over the intercom. Captain Dana Shaw to the flight deck. And the air shifted. The man who'd just mocked her stumbled. The girl with the phone lowered it mid-sentence, and the attendant's expression flickered from smug to ashen. Dana didn't flinch. She simply reached into her bag, pulled out her navy jacket with silver epaulets folded inside, and slid it on with steady hands. She walked forward without a word, toward the jet bridge that minutes ago they had treated as sacred ground. The crowd turned to watch, no one daring to speak. When the cockpit door shut behind her, and the gate agent returned to the podium, there was no more laughter. The terminal shimmered with polished steel and soft gold accents, the scent of cologne, espresso, and luxury leather drifting through air-conditioned stillness. A glass chandelier hung above the check-in lobby like a floating sculpture, and floor-to-ceiling windows cast angled light across marble floors. Travelers glided through in crisp blazers, designer sneakers, and smart luggage that hummed behind them. Dana Shaw stepped through the automated doors with a quiet presence. A plain field jacket, zipped halfway, and a worn aviation patch barely visible on the strap of her faded backpack. Her boots were scuffed at the heels, laces weathered. Her hair, pulled into a low, clean knot, revealed nothing but discipline. She moved with the calm of someone who had been through this building 100 times and never been seen. A man in a tailored charcoal coat checked his platinum card at the concierge desk and glanced sideways as she passed. "Back entrance is down that hall," he said under his breath, not to her, but to the concierge, loud enough to be overheard. The staffer gave a diplomatic chuckle and offered no correction. Dana didn't look over. She continued to the self-check kiosk, navigating quietly through the mass of polished suitcases and whispered complaints about upgrades. Her backpack rested neatly at her side, one hand on the strap. A girl in her early 20s with straight hair, false lashes, and a deep mauve blazer turned toward her phone and spoke into the camera without lowering her voice. "Okay, but why is someone dressed like a mail carrier standing in the premier lane? Can someone tag security?" The phone angled toward Dana for a split second, and then the girl burst into a shallow laugh and flipped the camera back. She whispered something to her boyfriend, who turned briefly to stare, unimpressed. The gate agent's nameplate read, Melissa. She wore a bright scarf looped once through her navy blouse, perfectly in line with the airline's brand image. When Dana approached, Melissa glanced up and then down again quickly. "This lane is for priority check-in and crew." "Ma'am," she said in a practiced tone. Dana reached inside her jacket and calmly produced an ID badge. She held it still, clipped it to her chest where it gleamed dully beneath her coat, and waited. Melissa blinked at the badge, then at her face, then at the badge again. "1 second." Her fingers fluttered over the keyboard. Dana stood with her shoulders back and weight even. She did not speak. Melissa's screen refreshed. You're on the manifest." She cleared her throat and waved Dana through. "Have a nice flight." No apology, just confusion, a hint of caution. Dana nodded once and moved on. At security, the lines split sharply. Passengers with infants, business travelers, and finally, the priority, and crew checkpoint. Dana stepped toward it. A guard in a black uniform moved into her path. He held up a palm. "You can't enter here." She paused and nodded, producing her ID again. His brows drew together. "This is a crew lane," he repeated. "Where's your assignment slip?" Another officer behind him leaned over. "Let me see that." Dana handed the ID silently. He squinted at it, looked her up and down. His voice lost any tone of friendliness. "Where'd you get this made?" he asked. The first guard chuckled. "Probably got it from her boyfriend." "Come on. You're holding up the line." A businessman in a sleek black coat exhaled loudly behind her. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Just let her go. She's clearly lost." A woman to his left added, "They let anyone near the crew doors these days. No wonder flights are delayed." The guard returned the ID without a word and pointed her toward the general security line. Dana tucked the badge back inside her coat and did as told. In the standard lane, she waited behind a woman with 3 rolling bags and 2 children. When it was her turn, she unzipped her coat and lifted her backpack onto the belt. Her flight cap remained hidden inside, folded beneath a neatly packed layer of checklists and gloves. She slipped off her boots, set them into the gray tray, and stepped forward barefoot. The floor was cold. The man behind her winced when she bent slightly to untangle her laces. He smirked. "Rough morning," he said. She didn't reply. The scanner beeped once, then again. A TSA agent motioned her aside. They began removing items from her bag: notebooks, zip-sealed pouches, a pen light, a tightly rolled set of socks. No reaction when they found her cap, just a puzzled glance. "Traveling far?" one of them asked. She nodded. You know, next time you want to cosplay a pilot," another said, half joking. "Maybe rent the whole uniform, not just the patch." Someone in line behind her chuckled. Dana kept her hands at her sides. After the inspection, her items were returned. Nothing had been taken, but none of the agents said anything else. She sat at the bench to relace her boots, then shouldered the backpack again and walked away. No one followed. No one thanked her for her patience. They didn't have to. She wasn't expecting it. At the end of the concourse, she reached the fork leading to the crew lounge. A tall security guard stood in front of the frosted glass doors, arms crossed. He didn't move as she approached. "This area's restricted," he said. Dana didn't protest. She looked past him for a moment at the closed door, at the corridor beyond, then nodded and stepped away. The hallway spilled back into the passenger gates. Travelers bustled past with carts and neck pillows, clicking heels and tinny music from earbuds. Nobody looked at her twice now. She had become just another quiet shadow in a place full of noise. Dana stopped beneath a column where no one lingered. She set her backpack down beside her and leaned against the wall. Her coat hung closed. Her badge was hidden again. Her breath was even. The only people who noticed her were the ones who had already judged and dismissed her. She stood there, in silence, still and unshaken, and waited. The TSA checkpoint buzzed with sterile precision. Agents barked numbers and shuffled bins, their voices flat against the low hum of conveyors and rubber wheels. Signs for pre-check, global entry, and crew check-in flashed in digital blue overhead. Dana walked toward the crew lane, ID already in hand. But a guard with close-cropped hair and a radio clipped to his vest moved quickly into her path. "You can't enter here," he said, tone clipped. "This is for uniformed flight staff only." Dana offered the ID without a word, her hand steady. He took it, glanced down, then up at her face, his brow furrowing. Behind him, another officer leaned forward to look. Your flight crew?" the first one asked. His voice sharpened, volume rising just enough to draw attention. "Where's the uniform assignment slip?" She stayed quiet, her gaze level. The second guard reached for the badge, flipping it over as though it might reveal some deception. Her name and photo were printed cleanly across the top, the airline insignia beside it. But her clothing told a different story. Plain, pale shirt, muted coat, no company jacket, no rolling duffel with branded tags. "Where are you headed?" the second guard asked. "Lisbon," she said softly. A woman standing nearby in a designer poncho shifted her weight to one side, watching with thinly veiled amusement. A man who had passed her earlier at the check-in kiosk leaned toward his partner and whispered something with a smirk. His partner lifted a phone halfway, pretending to scroll, lens barely concealed. The first guard held the badge higher, now openly suspicious. "Why aren't you in uniform?" "She's probably trying to cut the line," the second said under his breath. Dana waited, unmoving. Another TSA officer arrived, a younger one, maybe new, eager. He took her badge and turned to the others. "Looks real," he said, unsure. "System scans it clean." "Could be fake," the first guard replied. "You know how many people try to get through with bootleg IDs? Might be one of those luggage handlers thinking she's crew." The younger one raised an eyebrow. "You want me to call it in?" "No. Send her back to General," the second said. "Let her explain it to someone else." The badge was returned without thanks. Dana took it, clipped it back inside her coat, and stepped out of the line. Her face remained calm, but the line of people waiting behind her shifted restlessly, watching her movements with subtle unease. She joined the regular security line. A woman ahead of her, wearing a soft Angora scarf and heeled boots, glanced over her shoulder and gave a pitying half-smile. "Rough morning," she said. Dana didn't respond. At the gray plastic table, she set her bag down and pulled off her boots. One lace had frayed at the end, and she worked it loose carefully, then laid the pair side by side in a tray. Her coat went into another. Her clear pouch of liquids, labeled and compliant, sat quietly between them. She unzipped her backpack and removed a few items, a worn folder, a pair of thin gloves, her flight cap folded neatly at the bottom. She set it aside, untouched. The conveyor took everything. A male agent waved her forward. She stepped into the scanner, arms overhead, feet on the printed decals. The machine pulsed once, then again. The agent frowned and motioned her aside. "Step this way, please." He waved to another officer, who approached with gloves already on. "We're going to do a bag check." Dana nodded. She watched as they opened her backpack, rifling through the tightly organized contents. They pulled out her gloves, flipped through the folder, examined her checklist, even unrolled a pair of socks. What's this?" one asked, holding up a laminated crew briefing. "Training reference," she replied. He gave a short laugh. "What? Are you studying to be a pilot?" She didn't answer. Her eyes remained on the tray of her belongings. "You travel a lot?" the other officer asked, clearly fishing for something. "Work." The first agent raised an eyebrow. "We'll see." Behind her, a child pointed. "Daddy, is she in trouble?" A man in a branded sweatshirt leaned down to whisper something in reply, shooting Dana a side glance. The agents found nothing worth detaining. They handed her bag back wordlessly. She repacked her belongings slowly, making sure nothing was bent or left behind. Her boots slid back on with ease, the laces tucked neatly. Her flight cap disappeared into the bottom of her backpack again. Unseen. She stepped away from the belt. Near the exit, a tall man in a sharp gray jacket, someone who had watched her the whole time, gave a low laugh as she passed. "Bit much for carry-on, isn't it?" Another man further down turned to his wife and said, "She looked like she was about to break down. Thought for sure they'd pull her." Dana walked past them without a sound. At the far end of the checkpoint, just before the crowds dispersed into the duty-free hallway, she paused. A glass wall let in natural light, casting a long reflection of her figure across the floor. Behind her, the checkpoint continued its churn of bodies, noise, and assumptions. Ahead of her, the gates. She adjusted her strap, her bag resting high on her shoulder now. There was no applause, no recognition, only the quiet scratch of her boot soles on the tile as she walked toward her flight. Gate 47 buzzed with impatience. Beyond its polished counters and bright digital displays, travelers paced in quiet choreography, juggling coffee cups, briefcases, and whispers of delay. The glass wall behind the gate shimmered with late afternoon light, casting warped reflections of the tarmac where a sleek Airbus sat parked, motionless, its jet bridge suspended like an unfinished sentence. Dana Shaw sat beneath one of the tall structural columns a few paces off to the side, half in shadow. Her boots were off, lined up carefully beside her, and her socks pressed flat against the cool tile. Her backpack leaned against her shin, one strap resting across her knee, worn fabric curling at the edge of the aviation patch. Across the terminal, the same wealthy traveler from earlier was now in the priority lane, checking his watch every few seconds, his glossy carry-on bag gliding beside him like an accessory. A young woman in a sharp beige blazer posed in front of the boarding sign, angling her phone and flipping her hair between shots. She laughed loudly into her camera and mouthed the words, "Still waiting," as she turned to scan the gate, eyes passing over Dana without pause. Dana reached into the front pocket of her backpack and removed a folded laminated sheet. It opened crisply in her lap, a pre-flight procedural checklist, dog-eared at one corner, fine print faded at the edges from repeated handling. She ran a fingertip down the page with quiet familiarity, lips unmoving, marking invisible progress. Beside her, the light from the window shifted and caught the fuselage of the aircraft beyond. She looked up once, eyes sharp. The belly door was open. Luggage carts moved in slow circles. A technician checked a panel near the wing root and disappeared beneath the plane. A gate agent walked by briskly, holding a clipboard. Her eyes scanned the manifest attached to the top. She looked out toward the concourse, then back toward the service hallway, clearly searching. Behind her, the queue at the gate counter lengthened as passengers murmured into their phones and checked connecting flights. Dana stayed where she was. Her fingers flipped to the next page of the checklist. She didn't need to read it, but the ritual was steadying. The engines had been tested hours ago. The weather over the Atlantic was clear until mid-crossing. Fueling was already logged. She adjusted the collar of her shirt slightly, letting it sit smoother against her neck. No rush. Another passenger, a man in his 40s wearing a monogrammed vest and wireless earbuds, sat 2 rows behind her and muttered, "If the pilot doesn't show in 10 minutes, I'm rebooking. These things always spiral." His voice wasn't aimed at anyone in particular, but the woman beside him nodded with half-interest. The gate crew continued checking tablets, conferring in hushed tones. One of them approached the PA system and tapped the microphone twice. The speakers crackled slightly before she spoke, voice clipped and formal. "We regret the delay. Flight 262 to Lisbon is currently awaiting final crew clearance. We appreciate your patience." The words hung in the air like a held breath. A few groans followed. The platinum card traveler shook his head dramatically, muttering something into his phone. The influencer girl started recording again. Dana didn't react. She slipped the checklist back into her backpack, smoothed the top flap, and rested her hand lightly across the zipper. Her shoes stayed off. Her gaze returned to the window, where the last bag was being loaded onto the rear cargo hold. A fuel truck rolled away from the wing and disappeared behind a service vehicle. The aircraft's navigation lights blinked, once sharp, clean, alive. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Steady. There was no hurry. They would board when the crew was complete, and she would be the one to take them home. The gate area had fallen into a sluggish kind of stillness, a tired blend of frustration and delay. Travelers shifted in their seats. A child banged a plastic dinosaur against a tray table. The influencer paced near the boarding lanes. Phone raised again, her voice too bright for the mood. Then came the call. "Captain Dana Shaw, please proceed to the flight deck for pre-departure checks." The announcement echoed cleanly through the terminal. cutting across the quiet like a precise note from a tuning fork. It landed wrong in several ears at once. The wealthy man in the priority queue blinked, turning toward the source of the voice as if he had misheard. The girl in beige froze, mid-recording, her mouth open, phone camera still rolling but now forgotten. Even the gate agent who had waved Dana through hours ago paused, her hands still on her tablet, lips parting in a silent reaction she couldn't catch in time. Dana stood slowly. No one recognized her at first. She was still in the same worn field jacket, backpack tucked beside her, but then she knelt quietly, opened the main zipper, and unfolded a dark navy jacket with silver stripes at the shoulder. Her fingers moved deliberately as she brushed the sleeves and slid it on, the fabric molding to her posture like a second skin. The patch on her backpack, once dismissed as novelty, now mirrored the wings pinned just above her chest. She stood, rolled her shoulders once, and then reached back into the bag. From a side pocket, she retrieved a worn but perfectly kept pilot's cap, the insignia stitched in gold thread. She adjusted it carefully, sweeping her hair into a tighter coil at the base of her neck. The nearby passengers had gone quiet. The man who had mocked her at security stood stiffly with his hand still resting on the handle of his carry-on. His voice, so steady in ridicule before, now stayed firmly sealed behind his clenched jaw. Dana walked past him without turning her head. A woman near the window, one who had barely registered her existence earlier, pulled her child closer as if sensing something shift. The influencer slowly lowered her phone, blinking, unsure whether to film or retreat. A TSA officer, one who had handled her ID at the checkpoint, was now stationed near the gate. His jaw slackened. For a second, he stepped forward, as if to say something, then stopped himself, swallowed, and backed into position. The gate agent at the podium cleared her throat. "Captain Shaw," she said, almost to herself. She stepped back from the scanner as Dana approached. "Ma'am," she added quickly, eyes flicking downward. Dana gave her a nod, calm and brief. Then she turned toward the jet bridge. The threshold felt different now, not because of the eyes behind her, but because of how far she had walked to reach it silently, in plain clothes, without demand or defense. Her boots landed quietly on the bridge's surface, steady steps that needed no applause. Inside the aircraft, the air was still. The cabin was half-lit in pre-boarding mode, and a few flight attendants near the galley froze when they saw her enter. One of them, younger, straightened at once and moved aside without a word. The cockpit door stood open. Dana stepped through. The first officer was seated already, his uniform crisp, headset around his neck. He turned as she entered, eyebrows rising for a moment. Then he stood. "Captain," he said, and his voice was clear, even certain. Dana nodded once. "Let's begin." She slid into the left seat, adjusted the armrest, and reached forward to begin the first check. Her fingers moved across the instrument panel with practiced familiarity. The switches, dials, gauges. Each one fell into place under her touch. Their order, known by heart. She didn't need to pause. She didn't need to look back. Through the cockpit window, the tarmac pulsed with motion ground crew loading the last cart of luggage, the tug vehicle shifting into position, a mechanic giving one final inspection beneath the right wing. It all moved in rhythm, and Dana matched its beat. Her voice low as she read off altitudes and systems data, checking with the first officer as he verified weather, fuel load, and route. Behind them, the terminal was still catching its breath. Inside the aircraft, the cabin crew resumed movement. A few spoke in hushed tones, but none approached the flight deck. Dana's presence didn't need explanation. Her title, her position, her steady hands made anything else unnecessary. A new announcement went out over the gate speakers. Flight 262 to Lisbon will now begin priority boarding. And just like that, they began again. Passengers scanning tickets, rolling bags down the aisle. The low shuffle of travel resumed. But those who had watched her earlier, Those who had laughed, those who had filmed her jacket and muttered about uniforms, they now stepped into the aircraft with downcast eyes, unsure whether to nod, to apologize, or to pretend they had never seen her at all. Dana didn't look up. She continued flipping switches, checking altimeter settings, confirming engine parameters. The first officer gave her the final thumbs up, and she toggled the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for passenger briefing and cross-check." Her voice was steady, professional, and heard by every person who had doubted her. But she didn't speak again. She didn't need to. This was her seat, her flight. Her silence was the final confirmation. 33,000 feet above the Atlantic, the sky began to fracture. It started with a low shudder, a subtle vibration beneath the soles of their shoes that passengers mistook for a minor pocket of rough air. The seatbelt signs were already on, the lights soft. Then came the second jolt, sharper, more decisive, followed by the groan of the fuselage reacting to sudden pressure. A tray clattered in the galley. Overhead, compartments trembled. In the cockpit, the radar display blinked red and yellow in fast pulses. Storm clusters flaring into view where only calm air had been forecast an hour earlier. Dana disengaged the autopilot with a flick of her finger. The slight mechanical click was the only sound she made. The first officer stiffened, eyes scanning the shifting data. Unexpected cell forming dead ahead. This wasn't on the last update. Dana's hands stayed firm on the controls. Request descent. Immediate drop to 270. Lateral shift south to avoid core. The first officer relayed the call to ATC. Dana's voice moved through the radio next level. Low, without urgency but unmistakably in command. She read out their position, vector request, and confirmed equipment status. There was no panic in her cadence, only clarity. Outside the cockpit glass, clouds thickened like folds of steel wool, edged with flickers of lightning. The sun vanished behind a mass of gray and green. Turbulence kicked harder now. The nose of the plane dipped as Dana guided the descent manually, adjusting trim and throttle as they dropped through unstable air. In the cabin, a scream rang out. A woman clutched her child across the aisle. Luggage shifted overhead. A water bottle hit the ground and rolled the length of the aisle. The influencer, still in her beige blazer, clung to her armrest with white knuckles. Her designer bag hugged to her chest. Her phone, for once, lay face down and forgotten on her tray. The wealthy traveler's bravado cracked as the aircraft jolted again, tilting slightly before leveling under Dana's control. He reached for the overhead panel and fumbled with the air vent, then stopped when the oxygen masks dropped. Dana adjusted altitude again, rerouting away from a second pressure front. She was already planning for diversion. The Lisbon flight path was no longer viable. Visibility ahead was thinning. Fuel remained strong. Her fingers moved steadily across the controls. The first officer fed her new data, barely keeping up. She keyed the intercom. "This is your captain speaking. We are experiencing severe weather outside standard parameters. We are initiating a controlled descent and reroute to our alternate airport. Cabin crew, remain seated and secured. All passengers, keep seatbelts fastened. We have full control." That was all. No embellishment, no dramatics, just truth, delivered with the weight of certainty. Behind her, the aircraft dipped into a new corridor of clear air, less violent, but still tight. Rain lashed against the cockpit windows in horizontal streams. Dana monitored the crosswinds, watching the airspeed drift and settle under her hand. They were approaching the alternate now, a coastal airstrip known for high wind but dependable access. She'd landed there before in rougher skies. The cockpit lights dimmed slightly with a flicker from the pressure fluctuations, but her systems stayed online. One gauge on the left panel blinked red for 2 seconds. Dana cross-checked it against the analog. Glitch only. She didn't blink. The first officer watched her with growing reverence. They dropped below cloud cover at 8,000 feet. Wind buffeted the frame again. Short bursts, but she compensated for each one. The coastline came into view through the mist runway lights flickering through the haze, long and slick with rain. Dana adjusted flaps. slowed the descent. The wipers worked at full speed across the glass. "Runway clear," came the call from the tower. "You are green." She guided the final approach with meticulous calculation. Slight left yaw, crosswind at 11 knots, touchdown speed just above standard due to water on the tarmac. She held the controls steady through the last minute, then brought the plane down with a firm, clean landing. The wheels screamed briefly. Then the aircraft settled, rolling along the wet runway with power and poise. Inside the cabin, the turbulence had gone quiet. So had the passengers. The overhead lights returned to normal. Flight attendants released their seatbelts and moved slowly down the aisles, checking on those who had cried or gripped their armrests too tightly. The influencer stared forward, lips parted. Her bag sat forgotten at her feet. The wealthy traveler sat back in his seat, hands folded now, eyes unreadable. Dana didn't make another announcement. She powered down the necessary systems and initiated the post-landing sequence, trading quiet words with the tower and her first officer. Outside, emergency vehicles stood ready, but unneeded. A technician waved as they rolled toward the auxiliary gate. Inside the cockpit, Dana reset the instruments, double-checked fuel logs, and pulled her checklist from the side panel. Everything clean, everything controlled. Her cap rested on the dash, damp with condensation, insignia glinting faintly beneath the instrument lights. There were no cheers, no applause. Only the weight of what had just passed through the cabin, those slow, dawning moments when fear dissolved not because of comforting words, but because someone, somewhere, clearly knew what to do. Dana removed her headset. She didn't need to say another word. The automatic doors of Terminal C slid open with their familiar hiss, and Dana stepped into the same polished world she had passed through days before. Same pale shirt, same faded backpack slung over one shoulder. Her boots struck the tile with calm rhythm. Nothing about her appearance had changed. But the atmosphere had. At the security checkpoint, a familiar face looked up from behind the podium. The older TSA officer, the one who had questioned her ID, then waved her off, stood straighter as he saw her approach. He gave a nod, hesitant at first, then firmer. "Morning, Captain," he said, voice lower than usual. She nodded back, not slowing her pace. Nearby, a junior agent who had once watched her bag with suspicion now stepped back to allow her through. No one asked questions. Her badge remained inside her coat, unseen, unnecessary. At the far end of the checkpoint, a younger officer paused mid-conversation. He followed her with his eyes, his hand frozen near a stack of gray bins. Dana glanced at him once, briefly, and continued through the checkpoint without a word. No resistance, no questions. The terminal buzzed as it always had. Rolling bags, announcements overhead, the smell of coffee from the kiosk near Gate 39. But this time, conversations lowered as she passed. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift in tone, as if the space had learned to observe before it assumed. The gate agent she had passed days earlier, the one who had hesitated over her ID, was seated behind the counter now, tablet in hand. He looked up and saw her, and immediately stood. He straightened his blazer and said, "Captain Shaw," with a voice far clearer than before. She offered a short nod and continued toward the corridor that led to staff access. He watched her go, lips pressed into a thin, uncertain line. Near the flight lounge, a flight attendant crossed paths with her, a young woman with sleek hair and a crisp uniform, the same one who had laughed about the lounge dress code. Her expression changed the moment she recognized Dana. She slowed, stepped aside. "I just wanted to say," she started, voice tight with nerves, "about before—" Dana didn't stop. She offered a glance, a nod, and kept walking. No need for more. Near the arrivals hall, a small press gathering had formed. Not a formal event, just a few reporters near the glass railing, waiting beside the airline's public relations rep. Dana had been asked to make a brief appearance before her next flight, and now she stood near the microphones, cap in hand. her name newly etched into recent headlines. One reporter, a woman with a notepad already half filled, asked the first question. Captain Shaw, many are calling your mid-air decision a masterclass in calm under pressure. Can you speak to what gave you that clarity, Dana looked out across the concourse, eyes resting briefly on a row of chairs she had once passed while being mocked. Then she returned her gaze to the reporter. Quiet. I used to clean these gates, she said. Now I fly out of them. No follow-up was needed. The moment stretched. The reporter scribbled furiously. A photographer raised his camera but hesitated, struck by something in her posture, grounded, whole, uninterested in spectacle. Dana gave a polite nod to the group and turned. The PR rep called after her, asking if she'd like to stay a bit longer, maybe speak to leadership or stop by the lounge. She shook her head once. Gently. There was a plane to catch. She passed through the side corridor leading toward the staff level. As she turned the corner where the maintenance team usually entered, she slowed. Above the door was something new, a small brass plaque, simple in shape, mounted near the security keypad. It read, "Any quiet stranger might be a hero in uniform. Honor everyone." There was no name, but she didn't need one. She paused for a second, looking at it not with pride, not with sentiment, but with the kind of still recognition that comes from surviving something unspoken. Then she pushed the door open and stepped through. The corridor was plain, white walls, linoleum floors, muffled footsteps from staff preparing for the next rush. Dana adjusted her grip on her backpack and walked the length of the hall, her flight cap tucked under her arm. As she turned left into the crew entrance, the last sound behind her was the quiet click of the door closing. No audience, no spotlight, just the hush of a changed space that had finally learned how to look twice. Dana Shaw walked through the same doors that once dismissed her, unchanged in appearance but transformed in the eyes of those around her. She never raised her voice or demanded recognition. She simply did her job, with focus, grace, and unshakable calm. In a world that judged her by her clothes, her silence, or her posture, she proved that true authority does not need to announce itself. It only needs to act. Her story is a reminder that self-worth is not given by others. It is carried, quietly and without apology. Sometimes, the most powerful presence in the room is the one no one noticed until it was too late to ignore. If Dana's journey moved you, take a moment to reflect. What assumptions do we carry about the people around us? Share your thoughts below, and follow for more stories of quiet strength and unseen power.